Now hear the word of the Lord from 2 Kings 25:27 through 30. In the 37th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim of Judah, evil Merodach ascended to the Babylonian throne. He was kind to Jehoiakim and released him from prison on April 2nd of that year. He spoke kindly to Jehoiakim and gave him a higher place than all the other exiled kings in Babylon. He supplied Jehoiakim with new clothes and replaced his prison garb and allowed him to dine in the king's presence for the rest of his life. So the king gave him a regular food allowance as long as he lived. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thanks. You may be seated. Good morning, Sojourn. Peace be with you. Welcome. It's good to see you all. If you're a guest or if you're visiting with us, my name's Jonah. I'm one of the pastors here at Sojourn. Our mission as a church is to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the good news of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for us, and then to build one another up as Jesus' church so that we can send one another to follow Jesus as instruments of truth, beauty, and goodness. So thanks a lot for being here. As you might be able to tell, the baptistry is out. We have got another baptism today. Thanks be to God. It's a real man. I hope some of y'all are paying attention. If you've been coming here for a couple of months now, the Lord's kindness and saving people, waking them up to His goodness and His beauty. And if you're here this morning and you've been noticing the baptisms and you've been saying, like, I'm just waiting on a sign from the Lord to get baptized, this is your sign. Get baptized. The waters are warm now. They weren't always warm, but they're literally warm. And so, if that's something, as you listen, as you hear Jeremy's testimony, as you hear the sermon or sing, if you feel a sense of the Lord calling you home, if you want to know how to cry out to Him for mercy, you can stop at the welcome table on the way out, and we'd love to talk to you about that and prepare you for baptism next week. But thanks be to God that He's saving people. Next week, we'll begin our journey in Advent. And if you want a travel companion for that, that's our season of longing and expectation, preparation for Christmas. Hannah Anderson, a good friend of our church, Hannah Anderson has a book called Heaven and Nature Sing. It's a 25 reflections on Advent. It's a wonderful book. Highly recommend it to you. You can pick that up on your way out, again, at the welcome table. So you could get baptized and you could get an Advent devotional all at the welcome table. Yep, it's almost like we planned it. We didn't plan that you'd buy it, whatever. If you get baptized, we'll give you one for free. Don't put it beyond me to bribe baptisms. What's wrong with that? Jesus said, get food. Come. You want water? What's the, I can't think of, not enticement. There's some word for that. Incentivize. Coercion? No, incentivization. No, come on. A little bit of coercion. I'll coerce somebody into baptism. I'll coerce somebody into following Jesus. It's kind of what I do for a living, if you think about it. If you want a couple opportunities to give here as we come to the end of the year, you've been hearing us talk for over a year now about installing some kind of wheelchair ramp lift device so that the rest of our building can be accessible. And we have hit the big green go button because we found a company that actually said they would do it. Well, don't clap yet. So here's what we're doing. At the top of the steps down there, that used to be the exterior of the building, and at one point the local school system put this building on. And so those steps down there, if you look to the right, at the top of the steps right over there, you'll see a little, like where an old window used to be. We're going to cut that out and put in a lift right there, so like an elevator that will go right down into the church hall over there. And it's $48,000. Last year we raised $26,000, and so for you finance majors out there, we are $22,000 short. We have the money in savings, would love not to do that. Year-end giving this year is going all towards that. So we're hoping to raise $22,000 in the next 4 weeks. If you want to help with that, you can write a check, and in the memo line, put year-end giving. That makes sure it goes to that. Or if you give online, you can, in the pull-down menu, hit year-end giving, and it'll go to that. Anything that comes in above that will go to, we're trying to turn that, I hate to say it, creepy boys' bathroom downstairs into like a family restroom. So any money that's above $22,000, someone back there is like about to write a $30,000 check. I can feel it. I can feel it in my spirit. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up. I'm a little ripped on coffee right now. Yeah, you can do that. Another way, if you want to give, Affordable Christmas is a ministry our church does every year. where we as a church buy Christmas presents off of wish lists given to us by our neighbors, and then we sell those Christmas presents back to them at about a 90% discount. And so as of right now, we are working with 13 families, and that represents 57 kids that we're buying Christmas presents for. You can stop at there's a table out by the bake sale all set up for Affordable Christmas, and you can stop there and talk to Jerica Smith. She's running with it. There's names of kids you can pick up. There's QR codes. I don't know how this happened, but she's got QR codes, if you know what those are. You can go to sojournnewalbany.com/affordable-Christmas. You can go to the app and get the wish list. There's all kinds of ways to figure out the presents. Buy a present, bring it to church, and that'll be a great way to serve the neighborhood. So, just going through all that stuff between the baptisms and the opportunities, I'm just really grateful for our church, grateful for your guys' generosity and the opportunities we have to serve our neighborhood here coming to the end of the year. This is our last Sunday in our Fall of the House of David series. We've been looking at Israel's history, and I've been grateful for the series, partially because there's a big part of the story of our family, what happened here with the nation of Israel, but even more than Israel's history or the history of failed kings, the book of 1st and 2nd Kings is preparation for God's coming king. It's not just about the kings that came and failed. It's also meant to help us prepare for a king that's been promised to us. If you zoom way out between 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, we've been like 4 months in these books, and try to say, like, what are these books really trying to do to us? I think the first thing that you'd come away with, if you read them all in one sitting, I think the first big takeaway you'd have is that people are terrible at being kings. Humans just aren't meant to be kings. That much power, that much authority, it goes bad every time. So you read these books, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and you'll likely come to the conclusion that people are terrible kings. But then, second, you'll have to wrestle with how much you long for a king. You might leave reading wondering if there will ever be a king who will ignite joy in every longing heart. Because in each one of us, we long for someone to be in charge, someone who will keep us safe, someone who will not fail, who remains faithful, who remains good, true, and beautiful, even to the end. Somebody that we can trust and rely on. But as we come to the end of this story, we have to acknowledge it's quite sober and sad. We didn't quite hit it last week, but in 2 Kings chapter 23, just a couple of chapters ago, there's a really sad shift in the language. The author changes the way he talks about Israel and Judah, the northern and southern kingdoms. Here's just one example. It starts happening towards the midway point of 2 Kings, and by the end of it, the language has shifted exclusively. So here's just one example from verse 2 of chapter 23. It says, "The king went up to the temple of the Lord with all the people of Judah and Jerusalem." And you read that, like, that doesn't sound sad at all. The shift in language isn't as clear in English. What's literally being said is the men of Judah and the people of Jerusalem. The point is that the sad point is you won't see the author talking about Judah and Israel anymore. You'll see them talking about people and the places where they live. You won't see the authors talking about Judah and Israel as nations anymore, because those places do not exist anymore. By the time we get to the end of 2 Kings, it's not a divided kingdom anymore, it's a destroyed kingdom. He describes the people in relation to the city they live in because their nations don't exist. So big picture, when you get to chapter 25, when you get to the end of the story, you have to see that Israel is not on the map anymore. You don't have Israel and Judah anymore. You have subsections of Babylon and Assyria. The house of David, by the end of this story, is in shambles. Israel is no longer divided, it's destroyed. You can go home and read chapter 25 on your own. I'll just tell you it's R-rated. It's horrific, it's graphic, It's sad. The king of Babylon, a man named Nebuchadnezzar, you ever heard that name before? Like, this dude is so bad that people are still talking about him thousands of years later. Nebuchadnezzar has invaded Jerusalem. They capture the king in Jerusalem, and they hold him down while they murder his sons in front of him. After dismembering, murdering his sons, they tear the king's eyes out. What do you think the lasting image in the king's mind was? They put the king in chains and they exile him, taking him to Babylon. After doing this to the king and his children, they burned the temple of the Lord to the ground. Just try to imagine the horrors for a moment. Whatever you think the worst case scenario politically is for you right now, this is worse. At one point in chapter 25, it says they burned every house down in Jerusalem. It wasn't just like, man, they really got my neighbors. Like, imagine standing on a hill and the town of Jerusalem, the whole city, God's city. The temple is destroyed. The king is in exile with blood streaming down his face. The whole city is on fire. Here's a sobering verse. He, that's Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed all the important buildings in the city. Then they tore down the walls of Jerusalem on every side. The image is one of utter destruction and desolation. Think of the smell. The emotional weight of chapter 25 is to communicate to us, it is over. The nation has failed. Some of you, particularly as we head into Thanksgiving and then into Christmas and all of the mixed emotions this season brings up, some of you know what it feels like to look around and wonder, how did this happen? You know what it feels like to look at your life and say, how did it come to this? If you're here and you feel like your life has fallen apart, if you look around and you feel like this is not how my story was supposed to go, if you look around and you feel like all the important buildings in your city have been burned to the ground, you have to know that the Bible is filled with people who know how you feel. And even more importantly, you need to know that it's okay, especially as we head into a season of quiet reflection and powerful memories. You have to know that it's okay. It may, in fact, be necessary to give yourself space to acknowledge all that you have lost. No doubt some of the women and men and children that suffered in Jerusalem were sinful people and did stuff that they should not have done. But the message of 1st and 2nd Kings repeatedly is that these people suffered because of the wickedness of their leader. God holds the leader accountable, not the people. And the reason I bring that up to you is to say that not only is their nation destroyed, not only are their homes gone, their sons and daughters are prisoners in exile, but it's not even the people's fault. These horrors have happened, and they can't even say sorry for something. We can sit with that for a moment and acknowledge it seems unfair. And if doctrinally you have a problem with the word unfair, can we at least agree it's horrifically sad to suffer like this, to see destruction and desolation like this? When we are in a similar place, when we are feeling similar things about who we are and what we've lived, it's good to be reminded that God is not done writing your story. How can I say that? Because I know that our story does not end in tears. Has anyone ever told you this? The story of your life, the story of God's people does not end in tears. It ends at a banquet with a shout and a song. So, again, if no one has told you this, the story that each one of us is wrapped up in is a story that ends in a shout and a song. It's a celebration, not tears at a funeral. Second Kings ends with about as big of a thud as you can imagine. What Kim read for us is the end of it. It just ends. But it does end at a banquet. I don't know if you caught it. It's a banquet in a foreign country. It's a banquet under a foreign king. The image that we end with is meant to carry us, to gently blow a little hope on whatever embers might still be burning in your soul. Try to pay attention to the imagery with me. In verse 27, where we began, it says, in the 37th year of the exile of King, Jehoiakim. Call him JJ, however you want to pronounce it. How many years? 37 years. I'm 42. That's like my whole life he spent in a prison cell. Dirt floors, cold, hungry. After 37 years, a new king, his name begins with evil, which is usually not a good sign about how good of a guy this is. A new king comes to power in Babylon, and surprisingly, we read he was kind to Jehoiakim. He released him from prison, this is hilarious, on April 2nd of that year. They remember the day. He gave him a higher place than all the other exiled kings in Babylon. He's still a prisoner, right? But he's out of his cell. What a strange image. A prisoner who's been released from his cell but remains a prisoner. For whatever reason, he was nicer to Jehoiakim than all of the other conquered kings. The king of Babylon has a favorite prisoner king, apparently. Still a prisoner, his nation is still destroyed, his people are still in exile, but he supplied Jehoiakim with new clothes to replace his prison garb and allowed him to dine in the king's presence for the rest of his life. So the king gave him a regular food allowance as long as he lived. And then the story's over. 600 years of history. And that's how it ends. And you would be forgiven if you have some kind of reaction like, what the heck? Or like, what kind of ending is this? It looks like the story is over. With the way we tend to read these stories, it looks like the promises have failed. There is no shouting or rejoicing here. Some of you need to know that these stories, you got to think of like grandpa sitting around the fire telling you a story more so than reading and dissecting every note. These were meant to be like movies playing in your mind. As in life, so with the Bible. If you are not at a banquet, if there is no shouting and no singing and no celebrating, then the story is not yet over. The Bible doesn't end in 2 Kings, and neither does the story of the house of David. So again, we were meant to sit around campfires and hear these stories. They were meant to stir our imaginations. So try to imagine, create this. Maybe you need to go on a walk later today and do this on your own. But try to imagine the highlights from this series in your mind, like you're creating a movie, like you're imagining the characters. Remember the story that began with the shepherd boy who becomes king. Remember the incredible feast. See King David dancing in the streets, celebrating as the Ark of the Covenant is brought home. Remember the songs and the splendor of Israel. Remember young Solomon being made king and the splendor of the temple that he dedicated to the Lord. All the treasures, the glory, the beauty, the happiness. Remember as the clouds came over Jerusalem, how twisted Solomon's heart became. Remember his hundreds of wives, the idol worship, and remember old man Solomon becoming a tyrant like Pharaoh in Egypt. Remember the rebellion against Solomon's son Rehoboam, the civil war. Do you remember all the assassinations? Do you remember all of the destruction? Hundreds of years of fighting and sadness. An invasion from Assyria, an invasion from Babylon, then complete and total destruction. And then imagine a 37-year time lapse of a king sitting in a cell, hunched over, cold, sick, dirty. Can you see smoke settling on the promised land that was once called Israel? If you're watching this, then slowly Imagine the king of Judah, who should be seated in a cell, or should be seated on a throne in Jerusalem, crouched in a cell in Babylon. What might you expect when the king of Babylon shows up outside of his cell? Instead of judgment or punishment or harsh words, the king of Babylon pulls the king of Judah out of his cell. What? He gives him new clothes. What's happening right now? And then you see the king of Babylon inviting the king of Judah to sit at his royal table with him. What might you think is happening after all the destruction? As the camera pulls back, you see the exiled king in new clothes at another king's table, eating another king's food. What might you think is happening? As the scene fades to black, we all know this. As the scene fades to black, you'd be like, oh, they cliffhangered me. There's got to be a sequel. It leaves you longing and hungering for how the story is going to end. Might there be something in you that says this story isn't over after all? Is there not a subtle glimmer of hope as we see the king of Judah eating at a royal table? It's not quite a banquet, but it's way closer to a banquet than it is a prison cell. It's not quite songs of celebration, but boy, it's not a funeral either. The scene makes me think of one of the most famous songs ever written. It's a song from the Bible. I bet everyone you know has heard it. Even if this is your first Sunday at a church, I'm very confident you've heard at least parts of this song before. It's one of the few verses in the Bible pretty much everyone has memorized in the King James Version. What some of us don't realize, it's a song that was written by a scared king. It was a song written by a king who was surrounded by his enemies, and he was on the run for his life. It's interesting because when he wrote it, he was the rightful king, but he wasn't the reigning king, meaning he wrote it in a cave. Some might look at it like a prison cell. He was likely hunched over, cold and hungry, as he scribbled it on a piece of parchment. The man who wrote this song is named David. It's his house we've been studying. He is the king of eternal promise. And listen to what he sang to the Lord, scared, cold, hungry, on the run. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You've heard the song before? It's beautiful. It's comforting. It's so wonderful. David is not at a banquet table singing songs of joy when he writes this, which lets him know that his story is not over yet. He sings as a way of hoping for that day, finding strength in the promise that was made to him. Sometimes we gather and sing because of how much we believe something to be true, but you guys got to know, sometimes we gather and sing because we really want it to be true. And so here he is holding on to these promises and singing. But verses 1 through 4, they're the famous parts of the song, but that's not the part that 2 Kings 25 makes me think of. It's just the one that we all know. The end of 2 Kings makes me think of the less famous part that comes next. Go back to the movie in your mind. See the king of Judah sitting alone at another king's table, eating another king's food, and hear King David singing in a cave. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. I can hear David singing as Jehoiakim is eating at another king's table. Israel may be fallen here, but the house of David is not destroyed because the one who made the promise is faithful and true. The promise was never dependent on these kings. The promise was dependent on the Lord. They're closer to a promised eternal feast than they were before by the time Kings is over. 2 Kings ends with the faintest glimmer of hope, a picture of a song of David that reminds us God is not done writing the story. And so we end our journey through the house of David wondering, will a new branch of the house of David emerge? Would God send a child king like Josiah? Do you remember him? We're left wondering, would God send a faithful king like Hezekiah? Would God send us a wise young king like Solomon? Could God perhaps send an unexpected shepherd like David? Even from a small town in Judah. Oh, that God would send a king. One who comes to lead us to a great banquet, maybe even a wedding feast, filled with shouts and songs and only the happiest of tears. I invite you to come back next week and see why we celebrate Advent. See what this means and celebrate the coming of the one true King, because God is not done writing our story. If you're willing and able, stand with me and we'll pray.